The bitter Colorado wind stole Amelia Blackburn's last breath as she collapsed into the snow-covered churchyard, her world fading to darkness as the white flakes swirled mercilessly around her weakened body. It was December 1883, and the blizzard that had swept through Victor, Colorado, had caught her woefully unprepared on her desperate journey to find sanctuary. Reese Kincaid had only intended to check on the church before heading back to his ranch outside town. The towering cowboy had promised Pastor Williams he'd secure the building before the worst of the storm hit. He never expected to find a woman dressed in city finery sprawled unconscious among the gravestones, her golden hair splayed across the snow like spun sunshine against the white. Without hesitation, he gathered her limp form into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fragile bird with frozen wings. Reese kicked open the church door, carrying her to the small back room where Pastor Williams sometimes slept when storms made the journey to his home impossible. "Miss, can you hear me?" Reese laid her gently on the narrow cot, brushing snow from her pale face. Her skin was cold as marble, lips tinged blue. He needed to warm her quickly. Frantically, he built a fire in the small stove, his calloused hands working with practiced efficiency despite his worry. When the flames finally caught, he returned to the mysterious woman. Her breathing was shallow but steady. He removed her sodden cloak and boots, covering her with every blanket he could find. The howling wind rattled the windows as he worked, the blizzard intensifying into what might become the worst storm Victor had seen in years. Reese knew they were trapped. The road back to town would be impassable now, and his horse was safely stabled behind the church. They would have to wait out the storm together, a rough-hewn cowboy and this elegant stranger whose life now rested in his weathered hands. Amelia stirred several hours later, consciousness returning in confusing fragments. The last thing she remembered was struggling through knee-deep snow, her strength failing as she spotted the small church on the hill. Now, warmth surrounded her, and the soft crackling of a fire filled her ears. "You're awake." The deep voice startled her, and she turned to see a man sitting nearby, his broad shoulders silhouetted by firelight. Panic seized her heart. Where am I?" Her voice emerged as a rasp. "Easy now," the stranger said, his tone gentle despite his imposing figure. "You're in the church in Victor. I found you collapsed in the churchyard. You nearly froze to death out there." He moved closer, and in the flickering light she could make out his features' strong jawline, concerned eyes, and a face weathered by sun and wind. "I'm Reese Kincaid. I ranch outside of town." "Amelia Blackburn," she whispered, attempting to sit up before dizziness forced her back down. "I need to get to town. I need to find—" A fit of coughing interrupted her words. "The only place you're going is nowhere until this storm passes," Reese said firmly, pouring water from a canteen. "Here, drink this. Town's cut off by now anyway." She accepted the water with trembling hands. "How long have I been here?" "About 5 hours. It'll be night soon, though you'd hardly know it with this whiteout." He nodded toward the small window, now completely obscured by driving snow. "We're stuck here till morning at least, maybe longer." Fear flickered across Amelia's face before she quickly masked it. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Kincaid, but I assure you I won't impose on your kindness any longer than absolutely necessary." Reese's weathered face broke into an unexpected smile that transformed his rugged features. "Don't believe I gave you much choice in the matter, Miss Blackburn. And out here, being stubborn about accepting help is a quick way to die." The bluntness of his words shocked her, so different from the careful, polite conversations she was accustomed to in Boston. Yet there was something refreshingly honest about his manner. "What brings a lady like you to Victor in the middle of winter?" he asked, stoking the fire. "You're not dressed for Colorado," That's certain. Amelia hesitated, years of caution making her wary, but something in Reese Kincaid's steady gaze made deception seem pointless. I'm looking for my brother, Alexander. He came west 2 years ago to work in the gold mines. Our parents passed away last month, and I need to find him. Reese nodded, offering no pity, which Amelia found oddly comforting. Victor's a mining town, all right. Plenty of men come seeking fortune. Some find it, most don't. His last letter mentioned working at the Independence mine, she said quietly. Have you heard of it? Everyone knows the Independence. One of the biggest operations in the district. Your brother picked one of the better mines to work, if that's any comfort. He studied her face. When did you last hear from him? 8 months ago. She looked away. His letters stopped rather abruptly. Reese didn't respond immediately, and his silence spoke volumes. They both knew what that might mean in a town like Victor, where mining accidents were commonplace and men disappeared into the earth with alarming regularity. I had to know, Amelia continued, her voice stronger now. I sold everything I could to make the journey. I have to find out what happened to him. That's brave, Reese said simply, the 2 words carrying more genuine respect than all the elaborate compliments she'd received in Boston drawing rooms. They fell into silence as the storm raged outside. Reese prepared a simple meal from supplies stored in the church pantry: beans, jerky, and hard biscuits. Not the fare Amelia was used to, but hunger made it taste better than the finest Boston restaurant offerings. As night truly fell, the church grew darker, with only the stove providing light and heat. Reese insisted Amelia keep the cot while he made a bedroll on the floor nearby. I'll stoke the fire through the night, he promised. You need rest if you're planning to continue your search tomorrow. You've been very kind, Mr. Kincaid, Amelia said, settling under the blankets. Most men would not have been so respectful. Reese looked genuinely puzzled. Don't see any other way to be, Miss Blackburn. My mother would rise from her grave and tan my hide if I treated a lady with anything less than respect. Despite everything, Amelia found herself smiling as she drifted off to sleep, the howling blizzard outside strangely comforting now that she was safe within these walls, under the watchful eye of a cowboy who seemed to have stepped out of a dime novel, yet possessed a gentle dignity those fictional heroes often lacked. Morning brought eerie silence as the storm had finally exhausted itself. Amelia woke to find Reese already up, brewing coffee on the stove. Sunlight streamed through the window, reflecting blindingly off the pristine snow outside. Good morning, Reese said, handing her a steaming cup. How are you feeling? Amelia sat up, taking stock of her condition. Better, thank you. In truth, her muscles ached and her head throbbed slightly, but she was alive, something that might not have been true without Reese Kincaid's intervention. Storms passed, but we've got at least 3 feet of snow out there, he informed her, looking out the window. Town's probably digging out. Might be a day before the roads are passable. Disappointment washed over Amelia. Every day delayed was another day of uncertainty about Alexander. Reese seemed to read her thoughts. I know you're anxious to start your search, but rushing out into this would only land you back in trouble. I understand, Amelia conceded. I suppose one more day won't matter after coming all this way. They spent the morning in surprisingly comfortable conversation. Reese told her about his ranch, modest by Colorado standards but his own, worked with his own hands after years of driving cattle for others. He'd been born in Missouri, the son of a farmer who'd lost everything in the war. Heading west at 17, he'd worked his way up from nothing. In turn, Amelia shared stories of Boston, of her life as a teacher before her parents' illness had forced her to resign her position to care for them. She spoke of Alexander, 4 years her junior but always protective, who had gone west to make his fortune when their father's business began failing. He promised to send for us once he'd established himself, she explained, staring into her coffee. The letters came regularly at first, full of excitement about the mining operations, the characters he'd met, the future he envisioned. Then they grew more sporadic, more measured. "Mining's hard work," Reese said. "Grinds down even the most enthusiastic spirits eventually." The last letter mentioned a claim he'd bought shares in. He was convinced it would yield a substantial return. She smiled sadly. "He always did dream big, my Alex." Around midday, they heard the sound of a horse approaching. Reese tensed instinctively, his hand moving toward his hip where Amelia noticed for the first time he wore a holster. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the door. A moment later, his posture relaxed. "It's Pastor Williams," he called back to her. The door opened, admitting a snow-dusted older man whose kind face brightened with surprise at seeing Amelia. "Well now, Reese, you didn't mention you had company when you offered to check on the church," the pastor said, removing his hat. "Found her collapsed in the churchyard just before the worst of the storm hit," Reese explained. "Miss Amelia Blackburn, this is Pastor Williams." "My dear girl," the pastor hurried over. "What a blessing Reese found you when he did, a night out in that blizzard." He shook his head, not needing to finish the thought. "I'm very grateful," Amelia said sincerely. "Miss Blackburn's looking for her brother," Reese explained. "Alexander Blackburn. Worked at the Independence mine. You know of him, Pastor." The pastor's smile faltered slightly. "The name is certainly familiar. Let me think." He furrowed his brow. "Young man, perhaps 25 or so, arrived from back east about 2 years back." Amelia's heart leapt. "Yes, that's him," Pastor Williams nodded slowly. "I recall him attending services a few times when he first arrived. Polite young man, educated." He hesitated. "But I haven't seen him in some months, I'm afraid." "He could be working different shifts," Reese suggested, seeing Amelia's face fall. "Miners often can't make Sunday services if they're on night rotations." "Of course," the pastor agreed quickly. "The mines run day and night. Miss Blackburn, the mining office in town, keeps records of all their workers. That would be your best place to start inquiring." "How are the roads to town?" Reese asked. "They're clearing Main Street now," Pastor Williams replied. "Should be passable by wagon by this afternoon. I've come to prepare the church for services tomorrow, presuming the weather holds." Reese turned to Amelia. "I'll take you into town once the roads are clear. We can start at the mining office, then check the boarding houses where most of the single miners stay." "I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking," Reese interrupted gently. "I'm offering. Besides, I know Victor and the people in it. You'd spend days trying to get information that I can help you find in hours." Amelia wanted to protest further but realized he was right. She knew nothing about this rough mining town or its inhabitants. Having Reese's guidance could make all the difference. "Thank you," she said simply. By late afternoon, they were making their way into Victor on Reese's sturdy wagon, pulled by 2 horses that navigated the snow-packed roads with remarkable sure-footedness. Amelia had insisted on wearing her own clothes, now dried by the church stove, though Reese had supplemented her city attire with a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. Victor revealed itself as a bustling mining town nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-covered mountains. Despite the recent blizzard, activity had already resumed, men shoveling paths, wagons delivering supplies, smoke rising from every chimney. The contrast between the pristine white snow and the gritty reality of a mining community struck Amelia immediately. "Independence Mining Company has their office there." Reese pointed to a substantial 2-story building on the main street. "We'll start there." The mining office was warm and surprisingly well appointed, with polished wood desks and a large map of the mining district covering one wall. A clerk looked up as they entered, his expression changing from boredom to interest when he saw Amelia. "Afternoon, Walter," Reese greeted him. "This is Miss Blackburn. She's looking for information about her brother, Alexander Blackburn. Worked at the Independence mine until at least 8 months ago." Walter's friendly expression flickered momentarily. "Blackburn, you say?" He turned to a large ledger, flipping through pages with practiced efficiency. "Ah, yes, Alexander Blackburn, started April 1881. Can you tell me where I might find him now?" Amelia asked eagerly. Walter glanced at Reese, then back at Amelia, discomfort evident in his expression. "Miss Blackburn, I'm sorry to inform you that Alexander Blackburn is no longer employed with Independence Mining." "Since when?" Reese asked sharply. Walter consulted the ledger again. "According to our records, his employment was terminated June 17th of last year." "Terminated?" Amelia's voice wavered. "Was there an accident?" "No, no," Walter assured her quickly. "Nothing like that. He was let go. The reason listed is—" He hesitated. "Insubordination and suspected theft of company property." Amelia gasped. "That's impossible. My brother would never steal anything." Walter shrugged uncomfortably. "I'm just reading what's in the records, madam." Reese placed a steadying hand on Amelia's arm. "Did he collect his final wages, Walter?" The clerk checked the ledger again. "Yes, paid in full on termination." "So he was alive and well as of June last year," Reese concluded. "Do you know where he went after?" "No idea," Walter said. "Though there was some talk about him and some others heading to Cripple Creek. They'd been going on about a new claim they'd bought shares in." Amelia's mind raced. "That matches his last letter. He mentioned a claim he was invested in." Outside the office, Amelia tried to process this new information. Alexander was alive, at least he had been 8 months ago, but accused of theft, something completely out of character for the brother she knew. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "We keep looking," Reese said firmly. "Miners talk. Someone in town will know more about your brother and this claim he invested in. Let's try the boarding houses next, then the saloons." The next few hours brought more questions than answers. At Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, they learned Alexander had indeed been a resident but had departed suddenly, leaving 2 weeks' rent unpaid. At the prospector's friend's saloon, a bartender recalled Alexander as a good customer, always paid his tab, but hadn't seen him since that business with Harker. "Who's Harker?" Amelia asked, but the bartender shrugged. "Mining company foreman, hard man, not much liked." With each stop, Amelia grew more concerned. The brother being described drinking in saloons, leaving debts unpaid, clashing with authority bore little resemblance to the Alexander she had known. As evening approached, they had exhausted most possibilities in town. Snow began falling again, light flurries that promised to increase as the night wore on. "We should find you a place to stay," Reese said, looking at the darkening sky. "Mrs. Holloway's would be safest for a lady on her own. We can continue tomorrow." "I didn't come prepared for an extended stay," Amelia admitted. "My funds are limited." Reese studied her face, seeing the proud determination there. "Mrs. Holloway sometimes needs help with the bookkeeping. I could speak with her about an arrangement." "At the boarding house, Mrs. Holloway," a robust widow with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner, assessed Amelia frankly. "Teacher, you say? And you can keep proper accounts?" When Amelia nodded, Mrs. Holloway continued, "My eyes aren't what they used to be, and these miners' scrawls give me headaches. Room and board in exchange for 2 hours' work, each day managing my ledgers." "That's very generous," Amelia said gratefully. "Not generosity, practicality." the older woman corrected. "And Reese Kincaid wouldn't bring trouble to my door, so I trust his judgment of your character." She showed Amelia to a small but clean room on the second floor. When they were alone again, Amelia turned to Reese. "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." "No need," he replied simply. "I'll come by tomorrow morning. We'll try the other saloons, maybe ride out to some of the smaller mining operations if the weather permits." "Why are you helping me?" Amelia asked suddenly. "You've already saved my life. You've discharged any debt that might create." Reese considered her question seriously. "Out here we help each other. It's not about debt," he hesitated. "And I know what it's like to search for family and find nothing but closed doors and cold trails." Before she could ask what he meant, he tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Miss Blackburn. Tomorrow might be a long day." That night, alone in the strange room, Amelia found herself thinking not just of Alexander, but of Reese Kincaid. There was something compelling about the cowboy, a quiet strength, an understated integrity that reminded her of her father. In just one day, he had become her lifeline in this unfamiliar world, and she found herself oddly comforted knowing he would return in the morning. True to his word, Reese arrived early the next day. They spent the morning visiting every establishment in Victor where miners might gather: saloons, the general store, even the livery stable. By midday, they had pieced together a clearer picture of Alexander's activities in the months before his disappearance. So Alexander was fired after accusing his foreman, this man Harker, of skimming ore from the miners' findings, Amelia summarized as they sat in a small cafe. Then he and 3 other miners pooled their savings to buy shares in a claim near Cripple Creek. Reese nodded. "That's how it sounds." And according to Smithfield at the assay office, they brought in some promising samples about 7 months ago. Then why did his letters stop? If they'd struck it rich, surely he would have written. Or if they'd failed completely, Reese added thoughtfully. "It's the middle ground that's concerning, finding enough to keep going but not enough to feel successful. Makes me think something else happened. We need to go to Cripple Creek," Amelia decided firmly. Reese frowned. "It's 20 miles through mountain terrain in winter. Not a journey to take lightly." "I didn't come all the way from Boston to stop now," she insisted. "If Alexander is in Cripple Creek, that's where I need to go." Reese studied her determined expression. "You remind me of my sister," he said unexpectedly. She had that same look when she set her mind to something. "You have a sister?" It occurred to Amelia how little she knew about this man who had become so central to her quest. "Had," he corrected quietly. "Rebecca died of typhoid 10 years ago. She was 16. "I'm sorry," Amelia said, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. He nodded, then continued more briskly. "The stage to Cripple Creek won't run until the pass is cleared, could be days. But I know another route. Longer, but passable on horseback even in winter if you're careful." "You'd take me there," hope surged through her. "Wouldn't offer if I didn't mean it," he replied. "But we'd need to prepare properly. 2, maybe 3 days' journey each way depending on conditions. We'd need supplies, proper winter gear for you. I'll work extra hours for Mrs. Holloway to earn what I need," Amelia said quickly. "How soon could we leave?" "Day after tomorrow if the weather holds. I need to check on my ranch first, make arrangements for the stock while I'm gone." That afternoon, while Reese rode back to his ranch, Amelia threw herself into her work for Mrs. Holloway, organizing the chaotic ledgers with efficient precision. The boarding house owner was so pleased she offered Amelia additional work helping with correspondence. "Most of these miners can barely scratch their X, but they still need letters written home," Mrs. Holloway explained. "I've been doing it for those who ask, but my arthritis makes it painful these days. $1 per letter, you'd keep 50 cents. By evening, Amelia had earned enough to purchase a heavy wool coat, proper gloves, and a sturdy pair of boots from the general store, all essential for the journey ahead. Mrs. Holloway, seeing her determination, contributed a set of wool undergarments from my younger, slimmer days and a sheepskin hat with ear flaps that looked ridiculous but would keep her warm. The next day dawned clear and cold. Amelia spent the morning writing letters for miners eager to communicate with distant families. Their stories of backbreaking work, of dreams both fulfilled and shattered, of loneliness and camaraderie gave her new insight into the world her brother had entered. One elderly miner, thanking her for writing to his daughter in Pennsylvania, studied her face. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "You wouldn't happen to be related to a fellow named Blackburn, Alexander Blackburn?" Amelia's heart leapt. "He's my brother. Do you know him?" The miner, who introduced himself as Harold Jenkins, nodded slowly. "Worked alongside him at Independence for nearly a year. Smart young man, your brother. Too smart for his own good, some might say." "What do you mean?" He noticed things others missed. "Started keeping his own records of the ore we were pulling out versus what the company claimed was there." Jenkins lowered his voice. "Figured out Harker was doctoring the books, skimming the richest ore for himself before it ever got counted. So the theft accusation against my brother." "Backward, completely backward," Jenkins confirmed. "Alexander was the honest one, but Harker had the ear of the owners, and when it came down to his word against your brother's." He shrugged expressively. "What about this claim near Cripple Creek? Do you know anything about that?" Jenkins rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "Only that Alexander and some others who'd been fired, all troublemakers according to Harker, pooled their savings to buy it. Word was an old prospector had found color but was too feeble to work it himself. Sold them shares for a song." He chuckled. "Probably worthless, most such claims are, but your brother seemed mighty excited last time I saw him." "When was that?" Amelia pressed. "Late summer, maybe August. He came back to town for supplies. Said they were making progress, needed more equipment." Jenkins frowned. "Strange he hasn't been back since. Usually, miners come into town every few weeks at least, for supplies if nothing else." This new information left Amelia even more determined to reach Cripple Creek. When Reese returned that evening, she shared everything Jenkins had told her. "Confirms what I've been hearing," Reese said. "Alexander made enemies of the wrong people at Independence, but he wasn't dishonest, and this claim might have been legitimate. Or it might have been worthless and they've moved on to try their luck elsewhere," Amelia said, voicing the fear that had been growing. "He could be anywhere by now." "One step at a time," Reese advised. "We find the claim, we may find answers. I've made all the arrangements." "We leave at first light." They set out the next morning before dawn, Amelia riding a gentle mare Reese had borrowed from a friend, with supplies packed on a sturdy mule. The air was brutally cold but still, the sky gradually lightening to reveal a landscape transformed into a glittering wonderland by the recent snow. Amelia, though an adequate rider from occasional outings in Boston parks, found the rigors of mountain travel challenging. The path Reese chose wound through valleys and across ridges, sometimes so narrow that a single misstep could send horse and rider plunging down steep slopes. "The main road would be easier," Reese explained, "but it crosses high passes that are impassable after heavy snow. This old prospector's trail stays lower, follows natural shelters." By midday, Amelia's muscles screamed in protest, unaccustomed to hours in the saddle. She said nothing, determined not to delay their progress, but Reese noticed her stiffness when they stopped to rest the horses. "We'll make camp early tonight," he decided. "No sense pushing so hard we can't continue tomorrow." They found shelter in a small clearing protected by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. Reese efficiently established their camp, erecting a small tent for Amelia, building a fire, preparing a hearty stew from supplies they'd brought. As darkness fell, they sat close to the fire, the surrounding forest eerily silent except for the occasional crack of a branch releasing its burden of snow. "I've never seen stars so bright," Amelia marveled, looking up at the clear night sky. In Boston, the city lights and coal smoke obscure most of them. "That's one thing I love about ranching," Reese said, following her gaze upward. "No matter how hard the day's been, the stars remind you how small your troubles really are." "Is that why you became a rancher? For the solitude?" Reese considered the question. "Partly. After the war, I was just a boy when it ended, but Missouri was a hard place in those years. I wanted space, room to breathe without suspicion and hatred poisoning the air." He stoked the fire. "And I wanted something that was mine. Something no one could take away. You built it all yourself, your ranch, every fence post, every board in the cabin." There was quiet pride in his voice. "Started with just 10 acres and 3 cows. Now I've got 160 acres and a decent herd. Nothing fancy, but it's mine free and clear." Amelia found herself admiring this man more with each revelation. In Boston, she had known wealthy men who inherited fortunes and considered themselves successful. Reese Kincaid had built something from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. "What about you?" Reese asked. "Teaching seems like a respectable profession for a Boston lady, but is it what you wanted?" "It was," Amelia said thoughtfully. "I love learning, sharing knowledge, but truthfully, options are limited for women who need to support themselves respectably. Teaching or becoming a governess were the acceptable choices. No husband waiting back in Boston." The question was casual, but Amelia sensed genuine curiosity behind it. "No," she answered simply. "There was someone once a banker's son. We were practically engaged, but when father's business began failing." She shrugged. "He discovered his affections weren't quite as deep as he'd thought." "His loss," Reese said with such straightforward sincerity that Amelia felt a flush rise to her cheeks, grateful for the firelight that might disguise it. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting attention. "No wife managing your ranch while you gallivant around Colorado rescuing damsels in distress." Reese laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cold night air. "No wife. Had a sweetheart years back, but she chose a shopkeeper over a dirt-poor cowboy. Can't blame her, she's got a fine house in Denver now, from what I hear." "Her loss," Amelia echoed his words, making him smile. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their vastly different lives yet finding surprising common ground. Both had known loss, both valued independence, both harbored quiet dreams they rarely voiced aloud. When Amelia finally retired to her tent, wrapped in blankets against the mountain cold, she realized she felt more at ease with Reese Kincaid than she had with anyone since Alexander left. There was something about his straightforward manner, his quiet confidence, that made her feel safe despite the perilous journey they were undertaking. The next day brought heavier travel as they climbed higher into the mountains. The trail became steeper, the air noticeably thinner. By afternoon, clouds had rolled in, threatening snow. "We need to push harder," Reese said, eyeing the darkening sky with concern. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead, old miner's cabin. If we can reach it before this storm hits, we'll have solid shelter." They urged their mounts forward, the temperature dropping rapidly as the wind picked up. Snowflakes began to fall, first lazily, then with increasing urgency, reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. "Stay close," Reese called back to Amelia. "Follow my tracks exactly." The last mile to the cabin became a nightmare of blinding snow and biting wind. Amelia's fingers, despite the heavy gloves, grew numb with cold. She focused solely on the dark shape of Reese's horse ahead, trusting him completely to find their way. When the cabin finally appeared, a dim shape through the whirling white, Amelia nearly cried with relief. Reese quickly dismounted, forcing the door open against drifted snow. He helped Amelia down, her legs so stiff she could barely stand, and led her inside while the animals huddled miserably by the cabin's protected side. The interior was a single room, dusty and cold but blessedly sheltered from the wind. A small iron stove stood in one corner, and Reese immediately set about lighting a fire while Amelia stamped, feeling back into her feet. "We made it just in time," Reese said grimly as the wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's single window. This storm could last days. The prospect of being stranded in such close quarters might have alarmed Amelia a week earlier, but now she found herself oddly untroubled by it. She trusted Reese implicitly, and the thought of his company during the storm was more comforting than concerning. As the cabin slowly warmed, they settled into a surprisingly domestic routine. Reese ventured out briefly to care for the animals, rigging a makeshift shelter using a tarp from their supplies. Amelia sorted through their provisions, preparing a simple meal. The storm intensified throughout the evening, the wind finding every crack in the cabin's aging logs. They pushed an old bunk against the least drafty wall and piled it with their blankets. "You take the bunk," Reese insisted. "I'll be fine on the floor by the stove." Amelia started to protest, but saw the stubborn set of his jaw and realized argument would be futile. "Thank you," she said instead. "For everything. I'd likely be dead twice over if not for you, first in the churchyard, now in this blizzard." "You'd have found another way," Reese said, surprising her. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Amelia Blackburn." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something in the way he said it sent a peculiar warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, confining them to the cabin. They talked for hours, played cards with a tattered deck Reese found on a shelf, and took turns reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans that Amelia had brought in her saddlebag. By the second night the howling wind had lessened, but snow still fell steadily. They sat close to the stove, nursing cups of coffee as darkness settled outside. "Tell me about your brother," Reese said suddenly. "Not just the facts, what kind of man is he?" Amelia considered the question, grateful for the chance to speak of Alexander as a person rather than a mystery to be solved. "He's brilliant, for one thing. Could have been anything, doctor, lawyer, professor, but he was always restless, always looking toward the horizon." She smiled at a memory. When he was 12, he built a telescope from instructions in a science journal. Spent every clear night studying the stars, mapping their movements. "Sounds like someone who'd be drawn to prospecting," Reese observed. "Same kind of patient observation, same hope of discovery." "Yes, I suppose so," Amelia agreed. "He's also stubborn. Once he believes something, wild horses couldn't drag him from it. That's why I can't believe he would simply abandon us, stop writing altogether unless—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Unless something prevented him," Reese completed gently. Amelia nodded, blinking back sudden tears. "I've tried to prepare myself for the worst. Mining accidents, illness, even foul play, but not knowing is the hardest part." Without a word, Reese moved to sit beside her, his arm going around her shoulders in simple comfort. Amelia leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They sat that way for a long time, watching the fire's glow through the stove's iron grate, listening to the muted sounds of the storm outside. Later, Amelia would never be sure who moved first. Perhaps they turned toward each other simultaneously, drawn by some force neither could resist. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened, expressing feelings that had been building since that first day in the churchyard. When they finally broke apart, Amelia felt breathless, her heart racing. Reese touched her face gently, his eyes questioning. "I didn't plan this," he said softly. "I never expected." "Neither did I," she whispered, "but I'm not sorry." He smiled then, a smile that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger, almost boyish. "Nor am I." They kissed again, more confidently this time, but when Amelia moved closer, Reese gently pulled back. "Not like this," he said, his voice husky. "Not in some dusty cabin in the middle of nowhere, with you worried about your brother and dependent on me for safe passage." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve better, Amelia, and I respect you too much to rush this, whatever this is between us." His restraint, his concern for her dignity, only made Amelia admire him more. They spent the night as they had before, Amelia on the bunk, Reese on the floor, but with a new awareness of each other that charged the small cabin with unspoken possibilities. The third morning dawned clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape of untouched snow stretching as far as the eye could see. "We can reach Cripple Creek by nightfall if we start now," Reese said as they prepared to leave the cabin. "The snow will slow us down, but at least we can see where we're going." The journey proved challenging but manageable. The sun reflecting off the snow was almost blinding, and in places the drifts reached the horses' bellies. But by late afternoon, they crested a ridge and saw Cripple Creek spread below them, a sprawling mining camp that had sprung up virtually overnight following recent gold discoveries. Unlike the more established Victor, Cripple Creek had a raw, temporary field tents and hastily constructed wooden buildings scattered across the valley, smoke rising from countless fires. Mining equipment dotted the surrounding hills, evidence of the feverish activity that had drawn thousands to this remote location. "It's grown since I was here last," Reese observed as they made their careful way down toward the settlement. "Gold fever brings people faster than anything else." They reached the outskirts of town as dusk was falling. Reese led them to a two-story building with a crudely painted sign declaring it the Gold Strike Hotel. "Hotel's a generous description," he warned Amelia as they dismounted, "but the owner's an honest woman who runs a clean establishment. It's the safest place for you in a boom camp like this." The owner, a sharp-eyed widow named Mrs. Thornton, looked Amelia over with frank assessment before assigning her a tiny room on the second floor. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall, shared with 3 other ladies, all respectable, I assure you. No men allowed upstairs except my son who does the heavy work." Reese secured a room for himself in a separate boarding house down the street. "Best we maintain proprieties," he told Amelia quietly. "Mining camps breed gossip faster than gold." They agreed to meet for breakfast the next morning to begin their inquiries about Alexander and his partners. Despite her exhaustion from the journey, Amelia slept fitfully, her mind racing with possibilities. Was Alexander here in this very town? Would tomorrow bring answers or more questions? Morning brought renewed determination. After a simple breakfast at a nearby cafe, they began methodically visiting every establishment where miners gathered. The assay office provided confirmation that a claim had indeed been registered the previous summer by a partnership including Amelia Blackburn, located about 4 miles outside town in an area called Poverty Gulch. At the supply store, the proprietor remembered Alexander clearly. Educated fellow, not your typical prospector, bought quality equipment, paid cash. Him and his partners were regular customers for a while. When did you last see them? Amelia asked eagerly. The storekeeper scratched his beard. Been a while now. September, maybe. They'd been bringing in decent samples, nothing spectacular but promising enough to keep going. And then, Reese prompted when the man paused. Then nothing. Stopped coming in altogether. Happens all the time, claims play out, men move on. Though they'd paid in advance for some equipment they never collected. Thought that was odd. This pattern repeated throughout the day. Alexander and his partners had been known in town, had established credit and connections, then had simply vanished sometime in the fall. No one reported any quarrels or troubles that might explain their disappearance. By late afternoon, they had spoken to nearly everyone in Cripple Creek who might have information. The consensus was clear. The four partners had been working their claim steadily for months, then had stopped coming to town entirely. We need to visit the claim itself, Reese concluded as they sat in the hotel's small dining room that evening. Something doesn't add up. Men don't abandon paid-for equipment unless they're in a mighty big hurry or unable to collect it. Could they have struck it rich and left quietly to avoid claim jumpers? Amelia suggested hopefully. Possible, but unlikely. Rich strikes generate noise no matter how quiet folks try to keep them. And they'd have collected their equipment first, too valuable to leave behind. Reese's expression was grave. I don't want to worry you unnecessarily, but we need to prepare ourselves for what we might find. Amelia nodded, her stomach knotting with apprehension. How soon can we go? Tomorrow, at first light. I'll arrange for a guide who knows the area. These hills all look the same to outsiders, easy to get lost even with claim records. They found their guide in Pete Simmons, a grizzled old prospector who knew every gulch and draw in the district. For $2 and the promise of a hot meal, he agreed to take them to the Blackburn claim. They set out early the next morning, Pete leading the way on an ancient mule that somehow negotiated the snow-covered trails with sure-footed confidence. The journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain, the hills rising steeply on either side as they followed a narrow creek upstream. This here's Poverty Gulch, Pete announced as they entered a steep-sided valley. Named it that cause the first fellas to prospect here didn't find squat. Ironic now, considering some of the richest strikes in the district came from right up yonder. He pointed to scars in the hillsides where mines had been established. Where exactly is my brother's claim? Amelia asked. Patience, miss. It's up a side draw about a half-mile ahead. Not the choicest location, but not the worst neither. The side draw proved to be little more than a crease in the mountainside, with a small stream now frozen solid at its center. Pete led them up this narrow passage until it widened slightly into a small clearing. Here, signs of human activity became evident: a rough cabin built against the hillside, a shed for equipment, and the beginning of what appeared to be a mine adit tunneling into the slope. But something was wrong. The cabin door hung askew on broken hinges. No smoke rose from the chimney. No tracks disturbed the snow that had drifted against the buildings. Pete reined in his mule, suddenly wary. Something ain't right here. Place is abandoned but not proper-like. Reese dismounted, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. Stay here with Pete, he instructed Amelia. Let me check it out first. No, she said firmly, sliding down from her horse. If this involves Alexander, I need to see for myself. Reese clearly wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her eyes. Stay behind me then, he conceded. Pete, keep watch. If you see or hear anything unusual, fire a shot in the air. The old prospector nodded, pulling a well-worn shotgun from his saddle scabbard. Reese approached the cabin cautiously, Amelia close behind. The door creaked ominously as he pushed it open, revealing an interior that told a disturbing story. Furniture was overturned, provisions scattered. A layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for months. "There was a struggle here," Reese said quietly, examining a broken chair, a table thrown against a wall. Amelia moved to a small desk in the corner, where papers were strewn about. Among them, she found a journal she immediately recognized as Alexander's. He had kept similar records since childhood. With trembling hands, she opened it, flipping to the last entries. "The last date is October 2nd, she said, scanning the page. "He writes that they'd found a promising vein, were beginning to extract ore that assayed at nearly $30 per ton." She turned the page. "They were planning to bring in additional equipment, expand their operation." "Does he mention any troubles, threats?" Reese asked, continuing his examination of the cabin. Amelia shook her head, then froze as she turned to the final page. "Wait. Here's a hasty note, barely legible. H found us, claims we stole his research. Threatening to." She looked up, her face pale. "It ends there, mid-sentence." "H," Reese repeated thoughtfully. "Could be Harker, the foreman from Independence who accused your brother of theft." They searched the rest of the cabin, finding personal belongings that suggested the occupants had not planned to leave. Clothing still hanging on pegs, food supplies in cupboards, tools neatly arranged on shelves. In a small trunk beneath one of the bunks, Amelia discovered letters she had written to Alexander, carefully preserved. Outside, they examined the mine entrance. The timber supports appeared solid, the work professional. There was no sign of a cave-in or accident. "They were doing everything right," Pete commented, having joined them after securing the animals. "This here's proper mining, not just amateur scratching." "Could they have abandoned it if threatened?" Amelia asked. "Maybe they fled to another district, without their equipment." "Their personal belongings," Reese shook his head. "And your brother wouldn't have left his journal or your letters." A grim silence fell as the implications became impossible to ignore. "We need to alert the authorities," Reese finally said. "There's a county sheriff's deputy stationed in Cripple Creek now. This needs investigation beyond what we can do ourselves." They rode back to town in somber mood, Amelia clutching Alexander's journal to her chest. At the makeshift sheriff's office, little more than a desk in the corner of the assay building, they found Deputy Marshal Wilson, a former Army officer with a reputation for honesty in a district where law enforcement was often compromised by mining company interests. Reese explained the situation while Amelia provided details about Alexander and showed the deputy the journal with its ominous final entry. 4 men missing for months, signs of struggle, valuable equipment abandoned," Wilson summarized, taking notes. "And you believe this may be connected to a dispute with a foreman from Independence Mine named Harker?" "The evidence points that way," Reese confirmed. "Harker," Wilson mused. "Jasper Harker. Tall fellow, scar across his left cheek." "That's him," Pete interjected. "Mean as a stepped-on rattler and twice as dangerous." "He was here in Cripple Creek last October," Wilson revealed. "I remember because we had to break up a fight he started at the Golden Eagle Saloon. Claimed some miners had stolen company secrets, threatened to make them pay." "That fits the timeline," Reese said grimly. "Alexander's last journal entry was October 2nd. Wilson stood, strapping on his gun belt. "I'll ride out to the claim tomorrow with some men, conduct a proper search of the area." Mining disputes turning violent isn't uncommon, unfortunately, but 4 men don't just vanish without a trace. "What about Harker?" Amelia asked. "Shouldn't he be questioned?" "He left the district months ago," Wilson replied. Last I heard, he'd taken a position with a mining operation near Silverton, down in the San Juans. I'll send telegrams to the authorities there, request they locate and question him." As they left the deputy's office, Amelia felt a curious numbness. After months of uncertainty, she was closer to answers about Alexander's fate, but those answers threatened to confirm her worst fears. "What happens now?" she asked Reese as they stood in the fading light of late afternoon. "We wait for the deputy's search results," he said gently. "And I send some telegrams of my own. I have friends in Silverton who might be able to locate Harker faster than official channels." That evening, Amelia sat alone in her small hotel room, reading through Alexander's journal by lamplight. The entries detailed the daily progress of their mining operation, technical information about ore quality, equipment needs and expenses, interspersed with more personal observations. Alexander wrote of his partners with obvious respect, of their dreams for success, of his plans to bring their mother and sister west once the mine proved profitable. There was no indication of trouble until that final, truncated entry. Whatever had happened had come suddenly, unexpectedly. A soft knock at her door roused Amelia from these dark thoughts. She opened it to find Reese standing there, his expression grave. "May I come in? I have news, Mrs." Thornton's strict rules prohibited men in the women's rooms, but Amelia glanced down the empty hallway and quickly ushered him inside, leaving the door slightly ajar for propriety's sake. "What is it?" she asked, her heart racing. "I've sent telegrams to contacts in Silverton and received a reply already. Harker is indeed working there as a mine superintendent." Reese hesitated. "But there's more. My friend reports that Harker has been spending freely, investing in businesses, behaving like a man who's come into money suddenly. Far more than his position would pay. He found gold," Amelia realized. "Not his own, he stole Alexander's discovery." "It appears that way," Reese agreed. "I've shared this information with Deputy Wilson. He's expediting his investigation, will ride to the claim first thing tomorrow. He's also telegraphed the Silverton authorities to detain Harker for questioning." Amelia sank onto the edge of her bed, the implications overwhelming her. If Harker stole their discovery, what happened to Alexander and the others? Would he have? She couldn't complete the terrible question, but Reese understood. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "We don't know yet," he said firmly, "but we will find the truth, Amelia. I promise you that." She nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Will you come with me tomorrow? To the claim with the deputy. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Reese assured her. They joined Deputy Wilson's search party at dawn. Wilson himself, 2 deputies, and a local doctor named Fitzgerald. The ride to the claim was made in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they might discover. At the claim site, Wilson organized a methodical search. The cabin and mine entrance were examined more thoroughly, the surrounding area mapped out in grids to be searched systematically. It was midday when one of the deputies called out from a ravine about 100 yards behind the cabin. Everyone converged on the spot, where freshly melted snow had revealed disturbed earth partially hidden beneath a jumble of rocks. "The ground's been dug up here," the deputy explained, pointing to unnatural depressions in the soil. "Recently enough that the earth hasn't fully settled, even with the snow cover." Wilson directed the men to clear the rocks and begin digging. Reese tried to lead Amelia away, but she refused to leave, standing rigid as the grim work proceeded. They found the first body 3 feet down, a man in mining clothes, his features unrecognizable after months in the earth, but his size, and billed consistent with one of Alexander's partners based on descriptions they'd gathered in town. Nearby lay a second body, similarly decomposed. Amelia watched with numb detachment, her mind refusing to process the horror unfolding before her. It wasn't until the third grave was opened that her composure finally broke. "That's Alexander's watch," she whispered, recognizing the distinctive timepiece their father had given him on his 21st birthday. "And his ring." Reese pulled her against him as she began to sob, her body shaking with grief finally given release. Wilson and his men worked grimly, eventually uncovering the fourth body as the doctor examined each in turn. "Gunshot wounds," Dr. Fitzgerald confirmed quietly. "Execution style to the back of the head. They never had a chance to defend themselves." Wilson removed his hat, standing respectfully before the makeshift graves. "We'll bring them back proper, give them a decent burial," he promised Amelia. "And I'll personally see that Harker answers for this." The journey back to Cripple Creek was a blur for Amelia, her mind overwhelmed by grief. Reese never left her side, his steady presence the only thing keeping her from collapsing entirely. The next days passed in a haze of necessary arrangements. The bodies were brought to town, officially identified through personal effects and records. A telegraph to Boston confirmed Alexander's identity through dental work his family dentist had documented. The local carpenter built simple but dignified coffins, and Pastor Matthews from the town's small church offered to conduct a service. Wilson sent additional telegrams to Silverton, only to receive the devastating news that Harker had fled upon learning of the investigation, taking substantial funds from the mining company's accounts with him. A manhunt was underway, but he had several days' head start. "We'll find him," Wilson assured Amelia. "Men like that make mistakes. They get overconfident. He'll surface somewhere." On the day of the funeral, the entire community of Cripple Creek turned out, despite few having known Alexander or his partners personally. Miners understood the brotherhood of their dangerous profession, the thin line between life and death that all who went underground faced daily. 4 of their own had been murdered for nothing more than finding what every man there sought, the glitter of gold in hard rock. Amelia stood beside the graves, her black mourning dress whipping in the cold wind. Reese remained at her side, a silent pillar of strength as Pastor Matthews spoke of lives cut short, of justice that would come in this world or the next. When it was over and the small crowd had dispersed, Amelia lingered, placing a smooth stone on Alexander's grave in the Jewish tradition of their mother's family. "He was so full of dreams," she said softly to Reese. "Always looking toward the horizon, certain that something wonderful waited just beyond it. He found it," Reese said gently. "His claim was Rich Harker wouldn't have killed for anything less. Alexander succeeded, Amelia. He just didn't live to see it." "Cold comfort," she whispered. "I know." Reese took her hand. "But he wouldn't want you to stay here, consumed by grief or thoughts of vengeance. Alexander sent you all those letters about the beauty he found here, the freedom, the possibility. That's what he would want you to remember." They walked back to town in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. At the hotel, Reese finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. "What will you do now? Return to Boston?" Amelia considered the question seriously. "There's nothing for me there anymore. The family home was sold to pay debts. My teaching position has been filled." She looked around at the rugged landscape. "As strange as it seems, I feel closer to Alexander here than I would in Boston. This is where he found his purpose, however briefly." "You could stay," Reese suggested carefully. "Victor needs a teacher for the miners' children. The town's been trying to establish a proper school for months." The possibility hung in the air between them, not just employment, but a new beginning, a different life than she had ever envisioned for herself. "And what about you?" Amelia asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Would you return to your ranch and forget the Boston lady who fainted in a churchyard?" Reese smiled, the expression warming his weathered features. "I think we both know that's not possible. Not anymore." He took her hands in his. "I'm not a wealthy man, Amelia. My ranch is modest, my cabin plain, but if you could consider a life there." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The question was clear in his eyes. "I think," Amelia said slowly, "that I would like to see this ranch of yours. To meet these cows you speak of with such pride." Her lips curved into a small smile, and perhaps to discover if a Boston teacher could adapt to life as a rancher's wife. Relief and joy spread across Reese's face. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Ranch life is hard, especially for someone used to city comforts." "I'm stronger than I appear," Amelia reminded him. "Someone very wise recently told me so." 2 weeks later, justice arrived in the form of a telegram from Wyoming Territory. Jasper Harker had been captured in Cheyenne, attempting to book passage east under an assumed name. Gold certificates matching the estimated value of ore from the Blackburn claim had been found in his possession, along with a revolver later confirmed to be the murder weapon through ballistic testing, a relatively new forensic technique that would ensure his conviction. Harker would stand trial in Cripple Creek, facing 4 counts of murder. The district attorney assured Amelia that hanging was the likely outcome, given the evidence and the community's outrage over the killings. With that grim business concluded, Amelia was finally ready to leave Cripple Creek behind. She had honored her brother's memory by ensuring his killer would face justice. Now, it was time to honor his spirit by embracing life with the same courage he had shown. Reese and Amelia departed for Victor on a clear spring morning, the journey considerably easier than their midwinter trek to Cripple Creek had been. They spoke with the town council about establishing a proper school, with Amelia as its teacher. The prospect of having an educated Easterner instruct their children appealed greatly to the growing community, and arrangements were quickly made for a schoolhouse to be built by summer. From Victor, they continued to Reese's ranch, nestled in a valley with mountains rising majestically behind it. The log cabin was indeed plain but solidly built, with large windows that filled the main room with light. A creek bubbled nearby, and meadows stretched toward distant foothills where cattle grazed peacefully. "It's beautiful," Amelia said honestly, taking in the panoramic view. "I can see why you love it here." "It's more beautiful with you in it," Reese replied simply. They were married 2 weeks later in the very church where their story had begun. Pastor Williams officiated, bemused by the romance that had blossomed from that snowy day when Reese had carried an unconscious stranger inside. Mrs. Holloway served as Amelia's matron of honor, while Deputy Wilson stood as Reese's best man, having formed a friendship during the investigation. The small church was filled with well-wishers ranchers who respected Reese's hard work and integrity, townspeople who had come to know Amelia during her time in Victor, miners who remembered Alexander and appreciated his sister's determination to find justice for him. As Amelia spoke her vows, she felt Alexander's presence strongly, as though he were standing beside her, approving of this unexpected turn her life had taken. The grief remained, a dull ache that would never completely disappear, but alongside it now bloomed something new: hope, purpose, love. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch that would now be their home together. Standing on the porch as sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Reese wrapped his arms around his new wife. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. This life is so different from everything you've known." Amelia turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had found her in a churchyard and, in saving her life, had given her a new one entirely. "I've never been more certain of anything," she assured him. "This is where I belong now with you." 5 years later, Amelia stood on that same porch, watching Reese teach their 3-year-old son, Alexander, to ride his first pony. Nearby, their 1-year-old daughter Rebecca played in a pen Reese had constructed, her delighted giggles carrying on the summer breeze. The ranch had prospered under their joint efforts. Amelia had brought organizational skills and business acumen that complemented Reese's practical knowledge. They had expanded the herd, added acreage, and built additional rooms onto the cabin to accommodate their growing family. 3 days a week, Amelia still taught at the Victor School, now housed in a proper building with glass windows and modern textbooks. She had introduced a lending library and adult education classes in the evenings, helping minors improve their reading and arithmetic skills. Life wasn't without challenges. Winters were still harsh, the work never ending, and the isolation sometimes difficult. But each challenge faced together had only strengthened their bond, deepening a love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. As Reese lifted little Alexander off the pony and carried him toward the house, both of them laughing, Amelia felt a profound contentment. She had found family again, not a replacement for what she had lost, but something new and precious. The heartbreak that had brought her west had led, through a twisting path of grief and discovery, to joy she could never have imagined on that snowy day when she had fainted in a churchyard, and a cowboy had carried her inside. That cowboy had never left her side since and never would.